Hello everyone, I'm Chloe Johnson and welcome to this Fresh Business Thinking webinar series, Lockdown Learning for Businesses, supported by BT. Fresh Business Thinking are proud to be a part of Skills of Tomorrow from BT, which is helping 10 million people in the UK make the most of life in the digital world. Working with us and other leading digital skills enterprise community organisations, BT have created and collated some of the best advice, information and support in one easy place to navigate. With everything in one place, it's easy for anyone to access our webinars as well as discover other ways they or their family and friends can grow their confidence and skills to make the most of tech. All it takes to get started is to visit www.bt.com/skills for tomorrow, or you can click on the link in the comments section. Coronavirus has been a real challenge for small businesses and entrepreneurs across the UK. At Fresh Business Thinking, we're used to putting on events, sharing expertise, and encouraging and supporting networking. Throughout the pandemic, we knew this simply couldn't just stop. Perhaps more than ever, this is a time when as a business community, we need to come together and support one another. And we're lucky enough to work with organisations and individuals who are passionate about supporting entrepreneurs during this difficult time. One of those is our speaker today, Cheryl Miller, a business coach, award-winning entrepreneur and author. Cheryl has mentored startups, aspiring leaders and managers for the Prince's Trust and Professional Women's Network London, and is co-founder of the Stilettos Network, a networking and events company for women from all backgrounds to discuss ways in which to personally advance in a more gender equal society. Today, Cheryl will set out the case of authenticity at work. Authenticity is as a means of driving greater loyalty and engagement, and as means of supporting and honouring diversity and inclusion initiatives. Cheryl will be talking for around 40 minutes and then we'll have some time for Q&A. If you do have any questions, you can leave them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and we'll do our best to get to them later on in the session. That's all from me for now and I'll pass over to you, Cheryl.
Thank you very much, Chloe, for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. I'm conscious that the weather's great, the sun's shining, certainly where I am. So thank you for jumping on this rather than being kind of like out in the garden or having jetted off somewhere exciting, which I know people are starting to do. So I'm going to share my screen with you. I promise I won't be killing you with PowerPoint today, but I have got a few slides I want to share with you just to share some bits of research and to just make some of the concepts a little bit clearer. So I'm going to share my screen. If you're having any problems seeing the screen or seeing me, just put it in the chat and we'll do what we can to sort that out. So yeah, as Chloe was saying, I'm going to be talking about what leadership looks like in a post-COVID world. I mean, I say post-COVID, the reality is I'm not sure what that means, and I think COVID is going to be around for a little while at least, but I'm going to be talking about why it's so important for brands and individuals to be themselves currently, and what that means. So okay, just moving the screen on. So a little bit about Reboot. So Reboot Global is a business that I started last year. I've got a picture there of my co-founder as well, Emma Howard. And what we're basically doing is we do coaching, retreats, podcasts and courses where we create space for reflection. So that's just a little bit about Reboot, which is the platform through which I'm sharing this webinar with you today. So I'm going to cover 5 elements of in today in terms of authenticity. So first of all, I'm going to talk about a concept called covering. If that's something that you haven't heard of, it really does explain why sometimes we aren't ourselves, particularly in a business setting. And then I'm going to talk about authenticity and the impact of home working specifically, because obviously that's almost like a window into our lives, which you can see behind me. I'm then going to talk about why trust in brands is even more important in the current climate with COVID and everything that's going on than before. Then I'm going to talk about how we can get comfortable in our own skin. So just as individuals, because obviously we bring ourselves to our work, to our businesses. And so how can we get to the nub of who we are and bring that to work every day? And then finally, I'm going to finish off by talking about the power of storytelling, in particular to create a more inclusive work environment. So that's the kind of the broad outline. So COVID, if any of you listen to a podcast that I do with Emma, you'll have heard me refer to COVID as a bit of a roller coaster. So we've been on some massive emotional highs and lows. For me personally, I spent most of lockdown with my daughter. So I was away from home. I was with my daughter, who was otherwise going to be on her own. And so actually we had quite a lot of quality time as kind of mother and daughter. We did have the odd argument about, who should kind of tidy up and kind of keeping a pristine minimalist apartment looking so. But generally for us, it was actually a good time of reflection and kind of getting a few things done. But obviously it hasn't been that way for everybody. And even I've sort of been through my own personal highs and lows. Obviously some people have had personal loss, but effectively, it's been an incredibly challenging time on all fronts, both in terms of as individuals and also as a collective. So I've got a little diagram there of probably some of the things that you can see on there that you might recognize, some of the feelings that you've had as we've gone through this time. And many people have been pushed to breaking point. So that's really the backdrop of which why we need more authenticity. We need people to just be themselves, to show up, because we are in a very, very challenging time. So who have been some of the business winners and losers? Obviously we're only really at the start of kind of some of the global shifts that we're going to see as a result of COVID. Personally, I think we're at the start of a huge renaissance, and I hope it ends up with us being in a much more positive space. But some of the business winners and losers in brief. So obviously Amazon, who, if we didn't think Amazon could deliver everything before COVID, we certainly do know that now. So Amazon obviously, has done very well out of this. Zoom has become the platform of choice somehow. So it's kind of beaten Google Hangouts, and it's kind of, I think, kicked Microsoft Teams to the curb somewhat. And so Zoom has done incredibly well out of this. And then unfortunately, some of the losers. So, Pret, one of my favourites, so somewhere where the office workers used to flock, was Pret-a-Manger. So unsurprisingly, they've announced the closure of some 30 or so stores. And obviously also John Lewis announcing some closures as well. So a really challenging time, to be honest. And that's why people are looking. They're looking for leadership, and they're looking for people that are completely genuine. So let's go into what that looks like. So covering. So this guy, now I'm a big Steve Jobs fan, a huge Steve Jobs fan, not just because I like Apple products, but because as a leader, and as an entrepreneur, an incredible visionary. The story of his return to Apple is perhaps one of the best kind of business comeback stories ever, really. Was ousted when he left, so was actually kicked out of the organization, came back, soon became interim CEO, and then was made CEO. If you've read anything about him, though, you'll know that he wasn't necessarily the nicest of people. So he didn't go around trying to make friends. He was unapologetically quite rude, actually quite dismissive of people, hated PowerPoint. So I'm not sure how he would have taken to this. But just an interesting character, I think, is the way you would describe it. But unapologetically authentic. As opposed to this guy, I don't know whether anybody knows who he is. The Apple phone obviously gives it away, but yes, this is Tim Cook. So Tim Cook, took over as CEO. But I just wanted to give you a bit of background on Tim Cook, because I think it's a fascinating story. So he was born in 1960 to working class parents in Alabama. I think his dad was a dockyard worker, and his mom was a pharmacy assistant. He grew up in Alabama, went to college in Alabama, graduated as an industrial engineer, and then went into the corporate space. So he spent many years at organizations like IBM, Compaq, and then after Steve Jobs returned back to Apple, and then was at the helm and was looking for people to kind of bolster his exec team, he then found Tim Cook. So Tim Cook joined Steve Jobs in 1998 in Apple. Interestingly, just before that, Tim Cook had a misdiagnosis of multiple sclerosis. So at one point, he thought he had MS. And he actually, says that was a major turning point for him, really sort of made him reflect on life differently. He became a massive fitness buff, and gives a lot to those charities. But I think it's quite important because, as I talk about covering, you'll see that some of the elements that sometimes people hide are sicknesses and illness and health. So that's Tim Cook. So he joins Apple. He's a big hit. He knows his stuff in terms of operations. Apparently Tim Cook is the man that we need to thank for the Apple Store. So his passion for logistics and detail and getting things right and really sewing up the supply chain are what really contributed to Apple's success. So that is Tim Cook. Interestingly, in 2014, following the receipt of many letters from young people and children in particular, because there were lots of rumours circulating about him being gay, in 2014 he came out as he was the first openly gay CEO in the Fortune 500, which just sounds incredible when you say it, that before 2014 there was never a gay CEO, but there was never one who was openly gay. And in 2014, he came out. Now, Tim Cook, when he talks about his reasons for why he hadn't come out before, he sort of says, he was a very private person. But actually, I would like to kind of suggest that, we know that that sexuality and sexual preference is one of the aspects that people cover on the most. And perhaps that was part of the reason that, that Tim Cook hadn't come out previously. So that's just, one of the examples of what covering looks like, particularly in a space where you've never seen anybody, you've never seen another CEO that's come out as gay. So it's perhaps not surprising that Tim Cook wanted to keep that part of his life private. So here are the 4 dimensions of covering. Now, the first one is appearance. And the example that I'm going to give you on this one is, if you'd have seen my photo in like my LinkedIn profile or anything like that, you'd have seen that I had I've got like short, straight hair. And certainly as Black females, Black women in particular, there's been a lot of talk over the years, and certainly in business spaces and in corporate spaces, we tend to think of straight hair as being neater. So you don't tend to see as many Black women with kind of, sort of curly, natural, kinky hair, or with their hair in braids, typically in corporate spaces, because we tend to think, it just doesn't fit. It's not the done thing. It doesn't look as smart. It doesn't look as professional. So that's an example of how we sometimes hide parts of our kind of like natural identity in our culture. It's called appearance-based covering. You've then got affiliation-based covering. So if I think about my own experiences of that, I grew up in a fairly religious household. So my grandmother was a Seventh-day Adventist, very, very strict. And it meant quite a strict sort of lifestyle. And one of the things that I'll never forget is being at work. So I joined EY very young, so I was 18, 19, I think, when I joined EY. And one of the things that I had to do was I had to observe the Sabbath, which is effectively the Jewish Sabbath. So it's Friday sunset to Saturday sunset. And I remember being literally, I would say, ridiculed by one of the managers there when I sort of said, I have to leave. I can't work those hours. And it really sort of stayed with me. And from that moment on, I remember kind of like almost downplaying, my faith, or sometimes being embarrassed to mention it at times. And that is, not wanting kind of to be, sort of associated with that side of my identity. So that's a really good example of kind of like affiliation-based covering. So I would hide that element of my personality. Advocacy-based is where you don't necessarily always stick up for, the group that you belong to. So, we often hear about things like work banter and jokes in the workplace. And, as a female, you might sometimes hear a joke that is sexist, or, if you're a person of colour, you may hear a joke that is, kind of mildly racist. And it's, do you speak up? Do you not? And what tends to happen in covering is that the person would not stick up for their group effectively, because they don't want to be associated with that group, and they don't want to be seen as being too militant, so they will just kind of keep quiet. And then the final one we've got is association based. So again, you might not want to be associated with other members of your group, because you don't want to be kind of given or attributed those same negative stereotypes. So those are the elements of covering. It's a fascinating piece of work, and if it's something that you're really interested in, I would definitely encourage you to find out more about it. It started off, there was a guy called Kenji Yoshino, who is a law professor at one of the New York universities. He actually wrote a book back in the early 2000s, and then Deloitte picked it up as a piece of research. They then did a study of over 3,000 people, and kind of came up with these statistics around covering. So some of the things to pull out then in terms of the work: more than half of us believe that our leaders, and if you replace leaders with brands and companies, etc., expect us to cover, on at least one of the axes. So that means that when we show up in business, we kind of subconsciously think that we are expected to not be ourselves. Interestingly, for this webinar, I was sort of thinking, should I wear a shirt? Should I wear a collar? Or do I just wear a t-shirt? And I thought, I'm just going to go with a t-shirt today. I thought I can't do a webinar on authenticity and feel as though I have to wear a shirt just because this is a business presentation. So, there are certain social norms, there are certain business norms that we conform to. And that's just a really good example. So 53% of us believe that we're supposed to conform, and also at least 61% of us covers on at least one axis, which is the one that I think is really interesting. So it's not all about just, if you're in a minority that you cover because you want to feel as though you're part of the majority. So if you look down in the kind of bottom right, 45% of straight white men cover. And some of the examples that were given in the research, it might be that you cover on class. So you might want to hide your working class background, or actually you might want to actually hide a wealthy background as well. So if you're from a working class background and you go into a business where everyone is public school educated, you might want to kind of like hide elements of who you are. You might also want to hide your age and maybe kind of not appear to be as old or as young as you are for whatever reason, depending on kind of what you feel that business demands. So we all cover. On the top left, you can see the LGB percentage at 83%. And apparently the group that covers the most, and it kind of came out of this research, was individuals who are LGBT+, if I add that on, who work in law firms. There's something about the law profession which we know is quite staid, and kind of has lots of issues around kind of like representation in particular and diversity, where people tend to cover the most. So that's just a kind of heads up on covering. Now, just something around authenticity of brands. And we're going to talk a little bit more about inclusion, because obviously it's a really hot topic at the moment for good reason. So, 93% of people said that their organisations, their businesses, etc., talk about having inclusion as a value. And, we know that for a long time, companies have talked about, people being their greatest asset, and all of those sorts of things. And also customers, we care about our customers, etc. But then when it comes down to it, only 78% of respondents felt that their organisation lived up to those values. So a good, more than a fifth of people feel that the organisation isn't living up to those values. And this is where, when you get that misalignment of the values, that's when people start to distrust the brands, they start to distrust leaders, and it actually leads to people leaving organisations. So what has homeworking done for authenticity, if anything? I see it personally as a massive opportunity, and I'll share with you why. So you probably remember this. I think when this happened, I don't know how many times I watched this. This just had me in stitches. So, here is Professor Robert Kelly being interviewed live on the BBC in, the kind of traditional sort of dark suit, the tie with a hue of red to denote some element of power. And then, in comes his daughter, who I think was 4 or 5 at the time, kind of swinging her arms, dancing. And And then it kind of gets even worse. You then have the baby in the stroller, which I just thought was like the funniest thing. And then you actually then have the wife desperately coming in to kind of rescue them. And apparently the reason that it took her a while to come in is she was actually watching it on the TV in the room next door. She hadn't heard that the kids had gone in, and obviously there was a slight delay on the camera, and so that's why it took her that long to get into the room. But look, these are the realities of home working, aren't they? You know, how many of us have been on calls where, you know, children's faces appear at the door, or all of a sudden you see a cat kind of like walking along, walking on top of your laptop, actually, if it's one of my cats potentially. So yeah, children and pets have definitely become a working from home hazard, if you want to call it that. But the reality is, I actually kind of see it as a bit of an opportunity for more authenticity if you're working from home, for revealing more of your personality. I found this interesting Twitter account recently, which, yeah, they rate your Zoom room. So you can send them pictures of your Zoom room, you can tweet it to them, and they'll give you a score out of 10. So they'll give you a score out of 10 based on, you know, what they think of the background. You know, it's not necessarily whether it's expensive or anything like that, but they'll also give you tips actually in terms of lighting, positioning of camera. So I had a bit of a challenge when I was thinking about the setup. So first of all, I was planning to record this over in my daughter's apartment, which is very minimalist, because she hasn't been living on her own very long, so she doesn't have as much stuff. And she has a very nice gallery wall. And I thought, oh, I'm going to record in front of the gallery wall today, to do with logistics and all sorts of things. I'm not there, I'm at home, in our home office. And originally I was planning to record from this table, so you'd be looking at that wall behind me, but the lighting's not so good over there. Then I had to spin the camera around, and then you get to see in the background, you get to see a bit more of the reality of me. So the reality is lots of books. In fact, those are my husband's books, but you know, I'm a big kind of bookworm. So lots of books. You can see a bit of clutter up there above the bookcase, which is my reality. You know, so even though there are only two of us living in a house that's more than big enough for the two of us, we hoard a lot of stuff, so there is clutter. So you know, this kind of is a window into me, into my life. And I kind of think that Zoom is an untapped opportunity to show more of your personality, and actually to spark conversations about who you are as well. So I just thought I'd pull together a few tips about how we can Zoom more authentically and take a grip of the opportunity. So the first one was to dress comfortably. You know, which, as I was saying, originally I was going to be in a collar, in a shirt, but I thought, you know what, I'm just going to be myself, and I'm going to be really comfortable. You know, 40 minutes is a long time to talk, so I thought dress comfortably. For those of you who are fed up of having conversations where you have to look at your own face while you're talking to somebody, you can actually turn off the self view. I literally only figured this out last week, but yeah, if you find it distracting to see your own face, you can turn it off so that you can feel less self-conscious. And then virtual backgrounds. Okay, I did a business breakfast briefing about a month ago, and it was with people from a law firm. And two of the people from a law firm, they were using virtual backgrounds, which effectively were like it was kind of like their reception and their logo. And then there was myself and another external speaker, and we were obviously just like in our homes. What was interesting about the guys from the law firm as well, though, not only did they have like the kind of branded background, they were also in like suits, or at least the top half was like a suit jacket. Who knows what was on the lower half? But they were in suit jackets, and I just thought, isn't that strange, you know? But I guess that's how some people roll, you know, kind of in their homes, still on Zoom. And some people think, you know, if we're giving a business impression, then I want to look like I mean business. But I would say, certainly in terms of virtual backgrounds, you know, I think only if you absolutely have to. I feel as though virtual backgrounds were fashionable, like for maybe about 10 seconds or something, and then the novelty kind of wears off, and then you've really lost that opportunity to show a little bit of who you are. Obviously, I'm conscious that not everybody has the luxury of having the space to share their background. So you may actually be doing a Zoom with other people in the house, or you know, it may just not be practical. So I get that, but you know, my advice is just be yourself, share your background, share more of who you are. And then also, you know, strive for a natural balance in terms of eye contact and looking away. I'm trying to multitask, so apologies if the eye contact isn't with you all the time, but I feel it's more natural to kind of look at away. You know, we don't stare at everybody, stare directly into their eyes for 100% of the time when we're having a conversation with them. So neither should you necessarily do that on Zoom either. Okay, I'm going to move on to why trust in brands has become even more important. So we talked about some of the challenges of COVID and where we are now. I want to now talk about why the trust thing is so critical and how that sort of links up to the authenticity. Okay, so right, here we are, the reputational winners and losers in COVID-19. So I'm not going to go through all of the stories of the brands, but, you know, we all know that Richard Branson has kind of said some stuff that maybe, you know, didn't cast him in the best light, as did Sports Direct and also Wetherspoons. And in the last kind of week or so, boohoo.com has come under a lot of pressure at the moment around working practices in, you know, some of these garment factories in Leicestershire. So, yes, definitely some reputational losers. Some of the winners that have come out of this. So Brewdog, who are an amazing brand. If you haven't heard of them, if you're not into your beers, for example, I mean, they are authentic through and through as a brand. You know, they're founder-led, which is always an advantage. And so they're just so genuine. But what I loved about them was, you know, really at the start of the COVID pandemic, they almost didn't even have to wait to be asked. You know, they just switched their manufacturing capability to the hand sanitizer so quickly, and were so genuine in the way that they did it, you know, and didn't make a big song and dance about it and all of those sorts of things. So Brewdog definitely came out as a reputational winner. And then down at the bottom there, we've got Boris, and I'm not going to get all political, but Boris obviously, you know, doing his briefings from number 10 at the podium, and, you know, contrast him, and obviously, you know, his rating has gone down. So contrast Boris to Jacinda, who is obviously New Zealand's Prime Minister. Now, her method of communication, she obviously does briefings as well, like formal briefings, but she also does Facebook Lives, which I think is quite interesting. As a means of communication, obviously people feel that it's less formal. She's been known to do Facebook Lives quite late in the evening, just after she's put her young daughter to bed. So, you know, she has a much, much, much higher rating. In fact, I think people from other countries almost are looking to her for leadership as well. And some of that is down to a sense that we feel that we are being told the truth from Jacinda, whereas maybe less so with Boris. And then I want to talk about silence. So, you know, certainly with stuff that's happened in the last couple of weeks, people have been asking, is it okay to not say anything? And the answer is no, generally. In terms of crisis, customers want to hear from you. They want to hear what you think. They want to hear that you are, you know, that you're capable. They want to hear what your response is. They just want to, they want to know who you are, and they want to know what your thoughts are and what you're going through. And I guess some of that is just down to solidarity. So silence is not golden. So if you were kind of thinking that you didn't have to comment on stuff that's happening in terms of COVID, or that you didn't have to comment on things like Black Lives Matter, then I'm here to tell you, you know, your customers and your employees certainly want to hear from you. So why do brands need to create trust? Now, recently on the podcast, we had a psychotherapist on who was explaining some of the science behind fear, and why it is that people want to hear from brands more. Why do we want to trust in brands, particularly at this time? So fear kind of comes in sort of three elements. So fear of the physical harm. So obviously, you know, as a result of COVID, there was fear of loss of life, like genuine fear of loss of life. Fear of psychological harm, you know, and we heard quite a lot actually about, you know, the risks to mental health, and actually we're absolutely seeing that play out now. And then obviously fear of financial distress or ruin, which again, you know, we're seeing the realities of that. So all the three fears that you could imagine have all come as part of the, almost like the horrible cocktail that is COVID. And also COVID is new. So COVID-19 is fairly new. There have been other viruses and other threats, but this is new. So it really has raised, you know, our anxiety levels. And in this country, we are currently more fearful than any other country, and I'm not sure exactly why that is. And this is even other countries that have had higher death rates. We are more fearful here now. I think it may be something to do with the media. You know, there was an awful lot of scaremongering right at the start of COVID. I remember, you know, kind of saying to family members, you know, maybe you should only listen to the news once, you know, in the day, because it's just so heavy. And certainly during lockdown, we pretty much would only listen to the Downing Street briefing, because I just felt that the news was so sensationalist. I just felt it wasn't good for my my mental well-being. And then, to be honest, even in terms of the Downing Street briefings, when I felt that those briefings were no longer substantial, in terms of I couldn't equate the decisions that were being made to the data that was being shared, then I kind of, even I wanted to sort of switch off from those briefings as well. So, you know, confidence in UK government is low, particularly low at this time. So people are looking for leadership, and they're looking to brands, and they're looking to businesses, and they're looking to other people, because they're feeling that they're not getting it from the government. And then something that, you know, we couldn't talk about authenticity and leadership and inclusion without talking about Black Lives Matter and what's happened over the last couple of weeks. So this, I would say, you know, I've sort of said this had a compound effect. Because if we thought that the pressure was on, and that fears were on, and that anxiety levels had been raised as a result of COVID, it's taken, you know, the Black Lives Matter and the killing of George Floyd has taken things to another level. So I just wanted to kind of draw your attention to this particular Instagram campaign, which is called Pull Up for Change. Now, when it says pull up, what it means is pull up as in show us your diversity stats. Show us how many Black people you have working in your leadership and your management teams. And it came off the back of Blackout Tuesday. So as you'll remember, Blackout Tuesday was where people posted a black square in support of what was going on, in support of the movement. And a lot of people were like, okay, that's great, but actually, what are you doing? What's your track record in this space? And how many Black people are there in your leadership team? So this was the challenge that brands were given. And I just wanted to show you some of the brands that have been targeted for this campaign, because even though Instagram is usually the space of, you know, influencers and beauty brands and cosmetics and consumer facing brands, as you can see, you know, lots of brands have been targeted to kind of pull up. And if I just give you an example of why this campaign started. So on Blackout Tuesday, I remember that there was a particular brand, it's a fashion brand, a fast fashion brand, if I call it that, in the UK, that posted their black square. And then the following day, I think it was the following day, I don't think it was the same day, they posted a charity t-shirt that they'd mocked up fairly quickly, of the Black Lives Matter symbol, which is kind of like, you know, I think it's the two fists together was the one that they chose. And it was a charity t-shirt. And my daughter, who is 22, was 22 at the time, just quickly scrolled down their Instagram feed and could see that they had, you know, lots of models in their clothes, and they had not one model of colour. And so she thought, hang on a minute, how can you, you know, kind of profess your support for that as a cause, and yet you have nobody of, you know, you don't use models of colour. And, you know, she kind of sent them that message. And anyway, by the end of the day, they had actually taken down that t-shirt, and they said, you know what, we're looking, we're listening, and we're learning. And then in the weeks that followed, actually, they do now have a more diverse set of models, you know, and they kind of said, obviously, they're not going to get it perfect, and it's not going to be, they're not going to get everything right, but at least they're actually trying. And so that was just an example of why this campaign was started. So I've circled here Adidas, and I just wanted to let you know what happened to Adidas. I believe some of it was kind of linked to this campaign. So on June the 10th, Adidas were challenged to pull up. So, you know, let's see your diversity stats, Adidas, please. On June the 17th, 82 employees wrote a letter to the CEO asking for the HR chief to be investigated over her kind of, you know, leading of diversity and their diversity track record. By the end of June, the Adidas HR chief Karen Parkin had resigned. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to happen to every company, but I'm saying that what social media is doing in particular, which we've known this for some years now, if you are not authentic in what you say, if you are not authentic with your values, social media will blow the roof off that. It will lift the lid. You know, there is nowhere to hide, particularly with issues that are emotive, you know, and as deep rooted as this one. So what can you do in terms of responding in a crisis? So I was kind of like, you know, racking my brains to think, okay, what can you do? And I've kind of used the acronym of SPEAK, and I wanted it to be the opposite of silence, because we know that silence isn't acceptable. So, you know, I've just broken it down into SPEAK. So the first two, stop and pause. Don't be tempted to shoot from the hip, because I know that some people have done that and gotten it wrong. You know, which, you know, I think there can be a comeback from that if the intent was there, but you have to be very careful. I think actually some of the brands that I shared earlier in terms of some of those reputational losers, some of those individuals, they just said what they were thinking. But, you know, you kind of just have to think before you speak. So stop, pause, educate yourself, particularly if it's a topic that you're not that familiar. So just become informed about what it is that's going on, what the issues are, what public sentiment is, and then take action. So it's actions as well as words. And finally, keep listening and learning. So obviously it's iterative. So in the same way that, you know, consumers want brands to say something about COVID, they kind of want to hear from you on an ongoing basis. You know, it's not just a one-off. COVID is here. It's been here for a while. It's here to stay. They want to hear constantly, what are you thinking? Now, I know that as a consumer, you know, we're currently doing some projects where we've had issues with supplies, etc. And I'm constantly going back onto those websites to see, okay, what is the business saying now? You know, where is it at? So, you know, keep the conversation going. Don't let it just be a one-off. And then I'm going to get on to being comfortable in your own skin. So obviously that's a key part of authenticity. Authenticity is, you know, being real, being true to who you are. The saying there at the top of the slide, that's just one of my favorite sayings. Dr. Seuss and the Cat in the Hat was one of my favorite books. And, you know, there is no one alive who is you than you. So actually, you know, why would we just not bring our whole selves to our businesses, to our work, and to what we do? You know, it's how we get the best out of ourselves. So how do we define leadership? It's a combination of three things. It's how we speak, it's how we look, and it's also how we act. Now, I can see that time's ticking down, and I won't have time to run through all of this, but if you want to go back and watch the webinar on demand, you'll have a chance to kind of take it all in. But these are the three elements that people have said kind of define leadership. Gravitas, I think, is a really interesting one, which we'll come back to. What does leadership look like? Again, whether or not you're political, I have a theory that in most people's minds, Donald Trump probably epitomizes what we think leadership looks like. And there's some evidence to that. First of all, women are often told that they lack gravitas. In fact, a phrase that's often used in the US is that they often talk about women candidates as being unpresidential. So women are often told that they lack gravitas. Here, when we had the elections last year, Lembit Opik, when talking about Jo Swinson, said, nice human being, but she lacks the necessary emotional gravitas. So gravitas is often used as a kind of, and almost like a je ne sais quoi around leadership, but often women are said to not have the gravitas. And then I want to just pull out here around authenticity and leadership, because even though, if I just take you back to this slide here, only 5% of people said that leadership is around how you look. But when you actually drill down in terms of, and this is the same research organization, this is part of Harvard, when you actually drill it down, most people have a view that leadership and executive presence is wrapped up in traditionally white male standards. So there's something really complex going on there, which I don't have time to sort of boil down and go into currently. But there are a lot of people that feel the need to not be as authentic as they are, so that they conform to, you know, standards of what they feel leadership is. So those are some of the challenges that we're trying to get past. So how can you tap into who you are rather than just conforming to what you think leadership is? So I've just kind of pulled out a couple of resources and books. First of all, start with why. So if you haven't read it already, or if you haven't watched the TED Talk by Simon Sinek, I would highly recommend this. So really tapping into, first of all, what is your personal purpose, and then how do you bring that to your business and to the work that you do with teams, etc. Another great resource for doing that is Ikigai. So Ikigai, again, is a book, but there is also a TED Talk if you want to watch that. And that will really just help you get into the thinking of, who am I? What am I about? What's really important to me? And you can then bring that to your work and to your business. If you start there, my theory is the closer your business and your work is to who you are, the more authentic you will be. The further away those two circles are, the more likely you are to have to feel like you have to pretend and to conform to something that you're not, basically. And finally, in terms of being authentic, let's let go of perfection, shall we? We're all trying to strive to these, kind of Instagram perfect lifestyles. And actually, we all have flaws, we all have weaknesses. And the more that we can share those weaknesses and recognize that they're part of who we are, and they're part of what actually makes people connect with us and believe in us, we will be more authentic. I just wanted to share with you that when I was in my early 30s, I had a manager that said to me that sometimes it seemed as though I was wearing like a professional mask. I kind of put it down to my professional background. So I qualified with Ernst & Young, EY, many years ago. So I'd kind of worked there for a good 7-8 years. I then went into the corporate space, but I was just very used to a professional persona. But what that came across was like a mask that people kind of couldn't get beyond. And so I would just kind of like encourage you to, just be yourself, warts and all. And then finally, I'm going to finish off with authentic storytelling. I don't know how we're doing for questions. Charlotte, have we got many questions, or should I just continue? Because I probably got about 10 minutes worth more of presentation. But if we've got quite a few questions, I'm happy to kind of go at a canter.
Yeah, if you want to carry on, and then we'll fit some Q&As in at the end.
Cool. I'll go as quickly as I can. So storytelling, in terms of why storytelling is so powerful, so just a little bit of the science behind it. Storytelling, as long as it's not a horror story, tends to tap into certain parts of the brain. So, people obviously, they remember your points more, they focus on it, but also it creates bonding, it creates empathy, and it creates trust. And that's why actually storytelling is really useful in terms of, when you are sharing yourself with somebody. So sharing yourself in terms of your beliefs, your values as stories is a lot more effective than just saying to somebody, this is what I believe. But also it creates an environment where other people feel as though they can share their stories. So actually they get to share who they are. So it actually drives a more kind of like inclusive environment. Some of the elements of stories, so stories need villains and stories also need heroes. So I talked about Brewdog earlier. Brewdog, obviously one of the heroes of coronavirus. And one of the villains, Dominic Cummings, has kind of come out as one of the villains of coronavirus. And so Brewdog, actually, a bit tongue-in-cheek, but this is kind of their brands playing out. They created, kind of like a mock-up of this beer. So Barnard Castle Eye Test, obviously kind of poking a little bit of fun at Dominic Cummings. But the whole Dominic Cummings debacle was one of the reasons that the government's that trust in the government broke down, particularly after that incident. Who is this guy? So this, and in case you don't recognise him, this is, I think this picture's a little bit old actually, because I think he's put a little bit more weight on since then. This is Johnny Ive. Johnny Ive, so back to the Apple story. Johnny Ive is somebody that you tended not to see very much as part of the Apple story, but actually Johnny Ive is a key part of Apple. Him and the design team at Apple really are so pivotal in the beautiful and simple products that have been created. He was a close friend of Steve Jobs. And the reason I wanted to call him out is because sometimes when we're sharing stories, you don't often see who all of the heroes are. So not that many people are aware of Johnny Ive. That said, Johnny Ive is one of the few designers in tech companies who people are aware of. But sometimes what happens with stories is we forget who some of the players are, and sometimes we end up with one hero. I feel that we're in a climate where because we celebrate individuals so much, we sometimes overemphasize one hero and we don't recognize that there are more. And actually, if you're leading a business, it's very important to create an environment where when you're telling stories, there is perhaps more than one hero. It's not just all about the leader or the founder and the brilliant things that they've done. Create stories about kind of teamwork and, other people in the team, diverse voices, different voices. So this picture here, in terms of who these people are, I'm guessing that most people will probably recognize one of the names, and that's William Wilberforce. So William Wilberforce was a politician who was very key in the abolition of slavery. But interestingly, the guy that's underneath him in particular, William Wilberforce was key in the abolition of the slave trade. Thomas Clarkson actually was the one that kind of did a lot of the grunt work, if I'm being honest, and actually drove it to abolition of slavery altogether, as did some of the cast around. In particular, there were Black abolitionists who, by documenting their own personal stories, they were really, really effective in kind of driving petitions and driving support. And in particular, the women, so Elizabeth Hayrick, in particular from up north, and Hannah More, most of the women really got kind of like written out of the history of abolition. Which is a real shame. But basically, in stories, we can create a more inclusive environment if we actually create space for all of the heroes rather than kind of just having one person. So just a few tips here in terms of how you can use storytelling as a tool for authentic inclusion. So the next time, in fact, it's Monday. It's Monday, yeah. So when you ask somebody, what did you do this weekend? Just really probe them. Don't let it just be, shallow small talk, because to be honest, I think we're past that. We've just come through a pandemic. Nobody wants to do small talk. So why not have deeper conversations about, what they really did, who they saw, what was important, what it meant to them. The other one, as I've said, share stories that have a significant impact on you personally, and invite other people to do the same. So, are there any stories in your childhood that have significance and who have made you the person that you are today? Share those stories and encourage other people to do the same. And then, as I've said, finally, celebrate uniqueness. Celebrate lots of heroes in stories. It doesn't have to be about hero worship and one person, and kind of look for shared values. So those are just my tips, really. So that's kind of it. That was me on authenticity. I don't know what we're doing in terms of questions, Chloe, but I'm happy to take some questions, or I think at the end as well, I'll be sharing my details just in case anybody wants to connect with me via social media to sort of continue the conversation, because I would love to get your thoughts on authenticity and what you think some of the barriers are to that. So Chloe, do we have any questions?
We do. Thank you so much, Cheryl. That was a great session. Let's have a look at some of the questions we've had come in. The first is from Edward, who sent the question in with regards to reputation. As the environment becomes more of an issue, do you think brands who have greenwashed will suffer?
I do. I think it's going to be the same, in the same way that Black Lives Matter has become an issue, even though, diversity and inclusion, so, D&I initiatives have been going on for a long time. And it's only now that, as an issue comes to the forefront, that's when people look at how genuine are these companies? They've been saying it for a long time, but actually, have they done anything? Have they done anything? Do they actually believe it? Are they going to put their money where their mouth is? So I think you're right. I mean, I as I said, kind of at the top of the talk, I think that we're at the start of a major global shift. I mean, obviously what's happened has actually been quite good for the environment in terms of just this pause that everybody's had. And yeah, I genuinely hope, and in fact, I probably pray actually for some sort of renaissance. I think that we need a lot of learning, and we need a lot of healing, you know, and I know that sounds a little bit woo-woo, but we need to give the planet time to space and breathe. And you know, and we need time to kind of like reconnect with what humanity is all about, because you know it's not all about the greenbacks. It's the reality of things.
Jonathan has asked, what suggestions would you have for staff members who want to approach their managers, directors, business owners about the lack of inclusion and diversity at the company?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I've had so many questions about this in the light of what's happened. It's challenging. I think the one thing that always helps is sharing stories. You know, so going back to that, if you feel that the conversation is going to be difficult, I always think that the way you start a difficult conversation is by letting the other person know that it's going to be a difficult conversation. I know that sounds bonkers, but I think something as simple as saying, can I have 5 minutes? First of all, that signals that you're going to be having a conversation that might be quite difficult. So just by saying, have you got 5 minutes? And then by saying, you know, I need to have a conversation, and it might be a little bit awkward for one or both of us. And then you can either kind of, you know, say what you want to say in terms of, you know, I've noticed this or I've observed this, or you can just share your stories, and you know, you can just sort of say, you know, this is how I'm feeling, or these have been some of my experiences and this is how I'm feeling. Is there something that we can do? Is there something that, you know, you as business owners can do to address this, you know, because this is how we're feeling. So I think share from like your personal, you know, your personal experience, and then ask if there is something you can do to help the situation.
The next one, as a business leader, do you have any recommendations for development books?
Oh wow, how long have you got? How long have you got? I love books. I absolutely love books. I think it depends on what your need is. Oh my, I've got so many, honestly. If I were to sum it up, development books. If I think about personal, you know, sort of like personal kind of motivation, I mean, there are so many, aren't there? There are so many. The seven habits, I guess, I'd have to definitely mention. I'm a big fan of any books around kind of like pushing you to do more. So I'm a big fan actually of 10x by Grant Cardone, which is, I think certainly especially if you're a business owner, and you're looking for something to motivate you in terms of like goal setting and really going for it, then I would highly recommend 10x. I also like Tony Robbins. Yeah, unleash the power within. Anything by Tony Robbins I love, and I actually prefer Tony Robbins on audiobook to physical book, because I think actually he's a really good speaker, and you really get that on audiobook. Another author that I love, so you've got me started now, but a British author that I really love actually in terms of entrepreneurship is a guy called Daniel Priestley. I would highly recommend that you get all 4 of his books, and I think he's just released a new one. But he's got books, Key Person of Influence is one, 24 Assets is another, The Entrepreneur Revolution is an amazing book, and I can't remember what his 4th one is, but all of his books are amazing. But yeah, so many. And then one that's maybe a little bit more spiritual, Deepak Chopra and the 7 Spiritual Laws of Success. I would highly recommend that one as well. Love that book.
The next question is from Craig. My question regarding the post-COVID environment is, how do you measure the success of leadership or understand what good looks like when you have to operate so much in the virtual environment?
Okay, that's a good question. That's a good question. I mean, how do you measure the success of leadership? I guess, you know, being in a virtual environment, I know is different in some ways to being, you know, to being sort of face to face. But I guess the question I would ask back is how were you measuring leadership before, and then maybe just think about how you can flip that. And I don't want to go to prescriptive, you know, measures like surveys and things like that, but I think just conversations with, you know, with your team, with peers, etc. And asking for honest feedback. And I think going to the people that will give you honest feedback, not just the people that kind of like say, yes and kind of agree with everything, which I know is difficult, particularly if you're, the more senior you are in a business, the more likely you are to hear yes, the more likely people are to laugh at your jokes and all of those sorts of things. So you really have to go to the people that are going to be brutally honest, and kind of just check in with them in terms of, how do we think people are feeling. I think one of the measures of success actually in terms of leadership, just in terms of engagement, are people showing up? When I say are they showing up, as in, are they showing up on calls? If you're having, like, say, all team calls where everybody dials on, are the numbers dipping off? So if you're having like a weekly call, are the numbers dipping off? And that may not necessarily be just about your leadership. There just might be other issues. There might be an issue with workload, but just tuning into, I think you have to be ready to kind of tune into any of those signals that people are feeling the strain, or that you're maybe not listening, or maybe that you're not tapping into where they're at the time, is quite key. Yeah, so it's listening and looking a lot more than we used to, I think, when we're virtual.
The next question is from Tom. I'm a small business owner in the food sector with only 3 employees. I want my staff to be able to trust me and come to me with any issues they may have. What would be your top tip to become approachable?
That's a really good question. Because I know, and having worked in organisations where, bosses would often say, "Oh, my door's always open." And I've often worked, and I'm an accountant by background, so I've often worked with finance directors and CFOs who actually preferred their doors closed because they were quite introverted and often had to focus as well. It is a difficult one, in terms of how you let them know that you're approachable. I would say that the one way that you can do it, and I don't know what your daily interactions look like. When I was managing teams that were remote, when I think before lockdown, many years ago in my corporate space, I used to always make an effort to make sure that my first interaction with somebody that was remote was via a phone call and not an email. And I just thought that by basically almost like, I sometimes call it upgrading the channel of communication, that you basically almost like make yourself more approachable, make yourself more human. So what I would say is, if currently your interactions tend to be either via email, or they tend to be quite task focused, i.e. they tend to be, have you done X, Y, and Z? Or I would say maybe just try something where you call them out of the blue a little bit more, just to kind of ask how they're doing. I think by just creating space, when I say space, as in calls, whether it be a Zoom call, or if you said you're in a food business, so actually maybe you are face to face. So even just creating those moments in the day where you're just having a general chit chat, not necessarily asking, did that thing get done? We will just, not a work conversation at all, but just creating space in the day for more human conversation, like, how are things going? Just a more personal conversation. I think then you will start to be seen as more approachable. When I think about the bosses and the leaders that I've worked for that were more approachable, when I think back in reflection, it was because they shared more of their personal story, shared more about the kids, what was going on, their personal interests. It was those interactions, and having lots of those interactions, that actually made them seem more approachable. So it's actually, less interactions about work and more about personal stuff. Create space for personal interaction. That's what I would say. I hope that helps, Tom.
And the last question that we've got time for is come through anonymous, but it says, a great presentation and lots to ponder on. Do you believe organisations will take bold steps and allocate resources to improve on diversity? How will this be measured on an ongoing basis?
I'm a bit of a Pollyanna. I'm quite an optimist. So I am hopeful, and I do believe, so obviously when I talked about, for example, the Pull Up for Change campaign, I do believe that unfortunately it's come to the space where commercial pressures mean that organisations are going to have to make changes, because I think there will be so much pressure commercially. I mean, the Pull Up for Change campaign, they haven't explicitly said that consumers should boycott, but that's almost like the next step. And actually, boohoo.com, there has definitely been a boycott. So they have seen sales start to kind of dip, as a result of poor behaviours, not necessarily around diversity. So I do think that organisations will start to take diversity seriously. I mean, some of the companies that I actually hold up in high esteem around this point, and have done for a long time, Ben and Jerry's, obviously, Ben and Jerry's, this just goes to the core, and they've been banging this drum for years, and they have put resources into it, and they, it's something they believe about passionately. In terms of bigger companies as well, actually, Goldman Sachs, they've started to put their money where their mouth is a long time ago. So they came out, I'm going to say, I think it was about 2 years ago, and said that they would no longer be putting venture capitalist funding into any boards that were 100% male. They expected to see female representation. So that's a really good example, actually, of leadership and people, kind of putting in place some financial penalties, I guess, to be honest, if diversity isn't there. So I think those commercial pressures will lead to companies having to do more in diversity. And in fact, Apple, I think about 2 weeks ago, they as well introduced a big fund, obviously for the smaller companies. They won't necessarily have multi-million-dollar budgets to spend on diversity and inclusion. But, they'll be hiring consultants, to kind of come out and talk to staff, or they'll be sharing free webinars like this, if they can do, just to kind of try to take a few tips. But yeah, I think a lot of companies are going to do a lot more, not least because I think one of the things that's come out of the recent events is a lot of people in the UK probably still thought that racism wasn't an issue. And, the reality is, even though things here are not as bad as in the US, and I wholeheartedly believe that, but there are still, some remnants of those challenges. And so, people in the UK, and I've learned this a lot more through the education that I've been doing, people in the UK like to kind of live by a moral compass, actually, and a moral code of conduct. And I think that is driving a lot of people to education, to books, which is obviously the first step. And then that will result in action and allocating resource to diversity and inclusion in a more meaningful way.
Cheryl, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on this webinar. I'm sure our audience will agree it was a great session. Do you have any final words before we sign off?
My final words really are just around authenticity, and that really is just to be yourself, warts and all. There's only one of you.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Our next webinar in the Lockdown Learner for Business series takes place on Wednesday, the 29th of July with Rachel Horton, as she advises how to build a resilient team. If there is anything you'd like to catch up on from today's session, we'll be sending out a replay of the webinar coming at 5 p.m. today. You can find the replay and future webinars at www.freshbusinessthinking.haysummit.com or by clicking on the link in the comments. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you again, Cheryl.
Thanks, guys.
Goodbye.